guys, RanterInShades here, exercise my First Amendment rights vlog style. First of all, I want to apologize if I sound kind of tired or if I'm speaking too slowly. I'm kind of recovering from a cold, so hopefully it isn't too noticeable. Anyway, a couple days ago, I saw an article shared on my Facebook from metalinjection.net. This article was called, Iron Maiden Frontman Says Punk Musicians Can't Play Their Instruments and Are Jealous of Metal Musicians. Now, as someone who's a big fan of Iron Maiden, this struck my curiosity. This sounded like something you'd think would never happen. Bruce Dickinson, to me, always sounded like a very humble man, and you'd think that in order to keep a good public image, he would be respectful of other bands, including bands from other genres. But when I saw the title of this article, my mind was pretty much blown. As big a fan as I am, and always will be, of Bruce and Iron Maiden, I was disappointed greatly by this article. This type of shit isn't the kind of thing that would make me just stop listening to Maiden. I could never do that. Iron Maiden was the first band I've ever seen live, and a band I've loved for years. But seeing how out of touch and elitist Bruce sounded in this interview did sadden me a good bit. First, I want to talk about how it says in the beginning of the article that an interviewer claimed that metal was a lesser art form that got Bruce Dickinson all riled up. This is something I've kind of observed for a while and want to dedicate a future video to this concept. But what I've noticed is that if you tell a metalhead that metal sucks, they'll attack you viciously and venomously. And that's pretty much what Bruce did in this article, so if you guys want to know how to troll a metalhead or a metal elitist, it's ridiculously fucking easy. You just need to say metal sucks. So I'm going to respond to all of Bruce Dickinson's quotes in this article and give my thoughts on what he's saying. Here's what he says first. The closest the art establishment ever came to embracing metal was punk. The reason they embraced punk was because it was rubbish, and the reason they embraced rubbish was because they could control it. They could say, oh yeah, we're punk, so we can sneer at everybody. We can't play our fucking instruments, but that means we can make out that this whole thing is some enormous performance art. Here's the thing, Bruce. One reason punk is embraced is because it's music to feel angry with. Most punk bands that I've heard convey a pretty harsh and angry message. They can be angry at the government, angry at society, angry at their friends or girlfriends, or even angry at other bands. Punk rock exerts so much raw anger and energy, and fans of punk rock can basically let loose with it. That's why punk rock shows are so hectic. There's so much energy flowing around. Other punk rock bands put out lyrics that the listener can relate to. They can convey themes of being emotionally hurt or lied to. Lyrically speaking, I feel punk can be more easily relatable to than a lot of metal. I feel similarly about a lot of hip-hop. Back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of rappers spoke about what is known as the struggle, talking about coming from broken homes and troubled environments, racism, and the overall hardships that African Americans were going through at the time and still go through to this day. Rappers spoke to their audience on a deeply personal level, just like punk bands do. And I'm not saying metal bands don't speak on an entirely personal level, but a lot of metal can exert, themes of war and violence or fantasies and whatnot. But with punk rock and rap, it feels more real, to me anyway. And about punk musicians not being able to play their own instruments, you could not be more wrong there. There are punk bands I've listened to, many of which are hardcore, that are just as technical when it comes to their musicianship as metal bands. Music doesn't need crazy solos and riffage in order to be good. Metal isn't the only technical or advanced musical genre out there, and if you truly loved and valued music, you would understand that, especially if you're a professional musician like Bruce Dickinson. If you're going to make music professionally, you should at least have some love for music at large and not just for your own scene. This is one reason I love progressive music so much, since they try to incorporate different feels into their catalog. It really helps with avoiding sounding too one-dimensional, which is something almost every band in existence is in failure of being. Look at my band. In almost all of our songs, we look to try new things and make our catalog seem more interesting and diverse. I'm not saying metal isn't interesting, and I'm not saying Iron Maiden aren't interesting musically, but I feel that bands that experiment and have a varied catalog have more of an appreciation for music as an art form. But getting back to the ever so untalented punk musicians, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite bands of all time, Bayside. One reason I love Bayside so much is because of their guitarist, Jack O'Shea. He is one of the most technical lead guitarists I've ever heard in a punk rock band. And if you think punk rock guitarists can't play, I'm going to play you the solo to Bayside's song Pigsty from their new album Cult. Punk rock drumming can also be just as fast-paced as metal, and it takes a fair amount of talent to be able to sing fast in a hardcore style. So yes, punk musicians are good musicians. In fact, one of the key influences for thrash metal was hardcore punk. Half the kids that were in punk bands were laughing at the art establishment going, "What a fucking bunch of tosspots. Thanks very much, give us the money and we'll fuck off and stick it up our nose and shag birds." I just said earlier that there are punk bands that had an anti-establishment theme. Not all punk bands had that. They weren't just like, "Welcome to our show, now fuck off." In fact, many of them would be happy to make a profit and gain recognition for what they do. And shag birds? Are you kidding me, Bruce? I really expected better from you than to make that cheap of humor. But what they'd really love to be doing is being in a heavy metal band surrounded by porn stars. This is where I get the idea that Bruce is out of touch. This is 2014. I'm not seeing metal musicians surrounded by porn stars in this day and age. The heavy metal rock and roll lifestyle isn't exactly what it was 30 years ago, especially when all the bands from that time period are all much older. Who is surrounded by porn stars in their 50s? Even modern bands, I don't think, are living as promiscuous of a lifestyle. It's like Muse Productions said in a very old and now deleted video of his called "Where's the Sex and Drugs in Rock and Roll?" He said in that video that rock bands these days aren't going around getting into all the coke and pussy they can, because they want to maintain a positive public image, and that's the unfortunate reality of modern mainstream rock, which does include metal. It also reminds me of when I saw Motley Crue back in 2011. They had some exotic female dancers on stage, if you catch my drift, and I couldn't help but think, don't get me wrong, this is cool, but how comfortable are those women dancing half naked on stage with 4 guys in their 50s? I mean, if this were 1987, I think this would be expected, but it's 2011. The point I'm trying to make is that times have changed since the late 80s, and I don't think metal musicians live as excessive of a lifestyle as they'd like to think they do, being surrounded by porn stars, especially since a lot of them are married with children now. At the end of the article it says, "Maybe it's just me, but I feel Dickinson gets unjustifiably pissed about metal's non-acceptance in the art community back then than he should." Really? Non-acceptance? Really? Metal has always been accepted since the very beginning. Ever since the early 70s when Black Sabbath first came out, metal has always been a mainstream commercial genre. Need I remind you of what happened in 1983? An album was released by a band called Quiet Riot that was called Metal Health. You know what happened? That album became the first metal album to hit #1 on the Billboard chart. And in 1991, Skid Row released their second album, Slave to the Grind, and that album became the first metal album to debut at #1. 1994, Pantera's Far Beyond Driven became the first extreme metal album to hit #1. And in between those times, metal bands were releasing very successful albums and singles that are now regarded as classics. They also filmed music videos, which in the late 80s and early 90s were featured on an MTV program called Headbangers Ball. Metal has always been a mainstream genre, and it continues to be that way to this day. And if you're gonna deny that, you're lying to yourself. So in conclusion, I still love Iron Maiden, but this was not cool from Bruce Dickinson. He came off as very elitist and uneducated towards punk rock, and out of touch with his own genre. It's very sad. But what do you guys think? Share me your thoughts in the comment section below. Take care and have a nice day. I'm Shades, and I'll see you next time. Screw you, you beautiful red car.